lower Manhattan at the moment. Bill?
Peter, we are beginning to see a little bit more movement here of these large operations for search and rescue, which have been staged here during the day. They've been moving down the street past us here. But we had ABC crews come back just in the last few minutes, including correspondent Don Daler, telling us there are still flames coming out of the base of the trade towers. They're pouring water onto it, trying to get the trade towers themselves cooled down enough to move into the very center of it. There are search and rescue operations going on around the edge of the base of the trade towers, but a couple of buildings there are still on fire as well. We have seen some of the heavy equipment beginning to move some of the rubble out. It's just the beginning of a long process that's going to be, beginning to truck a little bit of it out. We have at the same time hundreds of firemen and volunteers and search and rescue workers here at what is nearly midnight in New York, standing by in these darkened streets. It's a very eerie feeling around us because the electricity is out all around this area. There are a few floodlights, but many of the streets completely dark, as everybody waits for it to get even cooler at the center so they can begin the operation, which is really just around the edges at the moment.
Thanks very much, Bill Blakemore, who we will go back to on a regular basis. All our reporters have been on the scene since the beginning, and so have these firefighters. An extraordinary collection of uniforms you've seen today. There's the police department, of course, and the fire department as well. And you'll see from time to time a jacket with ATF on the back of it, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, which had an office in the World Trade Center in New York. So these men now working in the search and hopefully rescue operation tonight have no place to work anymore, as do any number of people. 50,000 people, we've said it many times, worked in the Trade Center. And earlier today, we'll try to get it up again, you get some sense of the enormous amount of commerce and business and government business that was done in the trade towers. And said it before, it was just at that moment when people were coming to work or perhaps had not come to work. And that's one of the reasons we're so uncertain about the magnitude of the human tragedy there tonight, because as we have been told by people who managed to get out of the trade tower, that some people got out of the building, of at least the northern building, where the first aircraft hit, from some of the very highest floors close to where the explosion occurred, and many people got out in an orderly fashion from the lower floors. So we have no estimate whatsoever of the number of people who died. And as you all know, it's been an extraordinary day for the president, in part because we've seen the presidency at work in terms of security and the shield that just forms around the President of the United States, keeps the President and the Vice President separate. The leadership in Congress was whisked away to a, quote, secure location, as it turned out, outside Washington. But ABC's Ann Compton was with the President. Before we go to her to hear from her the moments which she and very few other people witnessed today, who at least can talk to us, here's what the President had to say, or in part what the President had to say to the nation. He's talked to the nation a couple times today, but here's what he had to say when he got back to the White House tonight.
America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks.
Excerpts from the President's address, which he and his staff didn't have an enormous amount of time to work on, but seems in large measure to satisfy people all over the nation tonight in terms of what he actually said. What government will do now is the question for tomorrow. But as we said, ABC's Ann Compton was with the President from the beginning of his trip today. She was the pool reporter on Air Force One today and had this quite a... Is there, Ann?
I am indeed.
This astonishing trip around the country with the President. We left you, I think, and it's worth, I think, perhaps revisiting the video of it, when you arrived in Nebraska and the President was taken into a bunker at what used to be and still is a Strategic Air Command headquarters base.
This is a place, Peter, where they knew the president would be able to teleconference with the vice president who was here at the White House. Even though most of the offices were evacuated, he was in a secure place in the Situation Room. But you can see the president getting out of a motorcade, and instead of these great, huge, important buildings at Offutt Air Force Base, the president and a group who was with him, he had a skeleton staff with him, he had a number of members of the military from the air base, and he gets out of a sedan, and look at them pile into this small yellow building. This was the entrance that led to a big underground bunker where the complete teleconferencing setup was ready to go. He used it for about an hour and a half, able to see Dick Cheney, able to see Condoleezza Rice here at the White House while they plotted what to do, what they knew, and the president began to make the beginnings of his address tonight. It was also the time, we were told, when the president said it is right for him to be back in Washington at the end of the day to show Americans that the federal government isn't shut down.
Then you described the fairly lengthy journey back from Nebraska to Washington and the extraordinary sight of fighter aircraft on your left and right wing securing the president's airspace. You know, this was the one flight of the day, Peter, when we knew as we took off where we were going. They said, yes, the president's going back to Washington. We assumed Andrews Air Force Base. And the president's press secretary came back to where just 5 of us were filling up the back rear of the plane. And he said, Ari Fleischer said, come look at this. And as you can see, this is off the left wing of the aircraft. This is where there was an F-16 sitting right off the president's wing. And frankly, it gave great comfort for those of us who we figured the planes were with us most of the day. And on the other wing, 2 F-15s on the side that the president would be able to see from his cabin as he worked on the remarks in his speech. It is so unusual to see that kind of physical security. The same was true when we landed at Andrews, how quickly he went aboard his helicopter. In fact, you and I were on the air at that moment. We had been told, don't say that he's going to helicopter. But Peter, how dramatic when that chopper came down around the White House South Lawn and the beautiful sunset, golden light, and behind him a huge plume of gray smoke from the still smoldering Pentagon. Press isn't usually allowed to helicopter with him, but they had us on a chopper right behind him. And it was a dramatic scene to show just how intense the effort was to keep the president safe. And this is for the president, it was also an unusual day. We haven't seen this man tested by fire, and we saw George Bush take the full brunt of everything today. Peter? Thanks, Andy. Ann Compton, who's had this extraordinary day with the president, and we want to talk to her again. But we have on the phone now in California, Alice Hoagland. Ms. Hoagland, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
First of all, let me say how very grateful we are that you take the time under such circumstances to call us, or sorry, to talk to us, not to call us, but to talk to us about what you know about today. I should tell you that Mrs. Hoagland, are you Mrs. Hoagland?
Miss Hoagland, I'm okay. The mother of Mark Bingham.
I know you are. The mother of Mark Bingham, who was on United Airlines Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania today. And Ms. Hoagland has agreed to tell us, I think, what your son said to you from the aircraft. Can you tell us from the beginning?
Yes, that's correct. The phone rang about 6:45 this morning, and Carol Phipps, a friend of the family, answered it, and she heard a male voice say, get Kathy or Alice quickly. And she did. She went and got Kathy, who is Mark's aunt. That's my sister-in-law. Is her home here. And I heard Kathy running down the hall. Kathy spoke to Mark. I heard her say, "We love you too, Mark." And I coming out of my room, she said, "Come talk to Mark. He has been hijacked." And I got on the phone. I heard Mark's voice. He said, "Mom, this is Mark Bingham." He was so flustered, I guess, giving me his last name. And he said, "I just wanted to let you know that I love you." He was repeating that, the same thing he had told Kathy a moment before. I told him, "We love you, Mark." And he said, "I'm on a flight, flight 93, United Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco, and there are 3 guys that have taken over the flight, and they say they have a bomb. And I'm calling you from the airphone on the plane," meaning not his cell phone, I guess. I found out since that he was sitting in the last part of first class and that the flight was fairly light. not very many passengers, 45 people aboard. So he may well be able to take a proactive part in that, and what they intended to do is target. I certainly hope so anyway.
Ms. Hoagland, I hate interviews like this at this moment, and I'm sure you are suffering in ways that we cannot imagine. Did your son say anything else to you about the circumstances on board the flight?
No, I wasn't able to. He was cut off. Can you hear me all right?
I can indeed.
The plane, the phone went dead after a few seconds. I got the impression that he was being distracted badly by something going on around him. I didn't hear anything except the sort of confusion. I didn't hear any explosions, any yelling, just voices, and then he seemed quite distracted about something. Quite calm voice, though. Was a very close fellow, and then he repeated that he loved us. He emphasized to me that what he was telling me was true. I told him I believed him, that we loved him, and the phone went dead. But I have been asked since. We immediately called the FBI, and they made any reference to any other weapons being used. They had to tell them no. He made mention of knives. We had a moment to speak. I think the reporter from San Francisco that
Mrs. Hoagland, how old was your son, and what did he do?
He's 31 years old. He's president of the Bingham Group, a public relations firm in San Francisco with an office in New York.
And have you talked to anybody in the government this evening? Has anybody in the airline or the government been in touch with you?
Well, United Airlines has called me to confirm that Mark was on the flight. The FBI has been in touch with me and has come out. Two of the representatives came out this morning in response to our call to them.
Well, Ms. Hoagland, thank you. Thank you for sharing this with us and with the nation. This is a day for you that we won't even begin to imagine, but I think we're...
I'm glad to be able to share what I have been able to find out.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's Alice Hoagland on the phone from California, we're told. We're told it's Alice Hoagland on the phone from California, the mother of Mark Bingham, one of the passengers on United Airlines Flight 93. Ms. Hoagland says she's been in touch with United Airlines since. It all seems to fit with early reporting that we had heard today about some of the passengers on United 93 managing to talk. She says the airphone, not his cell phone. Forget that many airplanes have airphones now. And there was chaos on the airplane. He was distracted. The phone went dead. And we know that 38 passengers and 7 crew died in this crash in Pennsylvania on an airplane that had, at least according to 1 or 2 sources we've spoken today in the Federal Aviation Administration environment, had asked to change its flight plan for Washington before it crashed for reasons we do not understand at this point in Pennsylvania. This has been a day, whether it's on the phone at great distance or closer up at the scene of a disaster, when people have been searching for news and connection and friends and relatives. John Quinones has one such example.
These are children who go to school right across from the Twin Towers. They were evacuated during the chaos. The faces of innocence, worried and frightened.
What did you hear?
I heard a big boom.
What happened then?
And it sort of shaked. Some kids were crying because their mom and dad were upstairs.
Among the people inside the burning towers, this little girl's father.
I was scared that my dad was still in there. Well,
You still don't know.
Her name is Jane Schoenholt. Her mother Brenda and sister Remy.
Well, my husband works in the World Trade Center, so it was more him.
Right across the street.
And she was in the school right down there.
What went through your mind?
I love you very much.
A lot of people I know are dying.
I just want my dad, I want my animals.
Her dad, Steve Schoenholt, runs a restaurant on the concourse level of the Twin Towers. He spoke to his family by phone this morning after the first explosion.
Why didn't he evacuate?
Because he thinks he's too tough for those terrorists.
But they haven't heard from their father since.
So let's go find him. Come on.
We follow them for blocks and blocks throughout the disaster zone.
I'm just used to walking over here and just seeing, the Twin Towers. It's scary to see just smoke. And that's it. I mean, that's my home, and it's gone.
Just a few blocks from their home,
Everyone back on the sidewalk, please.
were stopped by police.
Fortunately, right now, until we know that it's safe, we're asking everyone to move back.
Now, the people that were evacuated from the World Trade Center, where would they be right now?
Unfortunately, they are all over.
Officer, they're looking for their father who was in the building.
I understand. Unfortunately, my wife is in the building, and I still haven't heard from my wife. So.
On a cell phone, they call to see if Steve has turned up at one of his other restaurants.
Hi, is Steve there? Steve. Yep, okay.
Does that mean he's gone or he's still alive?
No, she just hasn't heard from him.
They continue their desperate search, past the rubble, past the screaming rescue vehicles, and then more barricades.
Okay, this is a secure location.
You can't go there.
Step aside and walk through the yellow line.
A secure location?
How do you feel right now?
I'm scared that my dad, we might not find him. I feel like he's alive. I just want to find him and make sure.
They run into one of their neighbors, who points them toward a police command center several blocks away.
And tell them your situation and that they will escort you to your house.
Yes, yes.
Right there at Pier 40.
Dan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's another long walk, and at the end, it once again seems fruitless.
And do you know anything about when we'll be able to get in there and get our animals? There's nothing here.
But then, as Brenda is in the middle of another desperate phone call trying to find her husband.
It'd be good to do that. We'll be within.
What?
One little happy ending on a day with so much anguish and so much heart.
In the building. I cried the whole way. I saw it coming down.
Oh, no.
In search of Steve. A happy ending where there have been so few today, and God didn't know where that was going for a moment there. And when they encountered the policeman and said they were looking for their father, and he said his wife was in the World Trade Center too, that was very difficult. Mayor Giuliani reports, Mayor of New York City, that some survivors have been pulled from the rubble tonight. And that is a huge relief that some survivors have been pulled from the rubble tonight, a huge relief to all of us, and a relief, too, I'm sure, to Frank Donahue from the American Red Cross, who's a member of the National Disaster Response Team for the Red Cross and came in today from Philadelphia. And you've had experience in earthquakes before, and I thought as you sat down, you suggested there's some similarity here.
Absolutely. Coming into New York today from Philadelphia, the Holland Tunnel, that eerie kind of sound and feeling when I arrived in New York City of literally hundreds and hundreds of firefighters and police standing by, and the smoke that was all over Lower Manhattan reminded me so much of the smoke I saw over Izmit, Turkey 2 years ago when 19,000 people died in that earthquake. And there are many similarities. Tonight I was down there and they were getting phone calls, cell phone calls from the rubble. And it is that kind of experience in an earthquake. And Red Cross is there to provide backup support for the medical staff that are on scene and the disaster workers that are pulling people from the rubble and the medical staff, but to provide relief to them, also to provide mental health support for family members like we just heard from that woman who presumably lost her son. We have Red Cross disaster workers at every airport, at LAX, at Boston's Logan, at Newark, in responding to family members that were waiting for loved ones on those flights today. And of course, Mr. Jennings, you know, the blood supply.
We've talked about it numerous times today. It's very hard to understand. Are you still looking for volunteers across the country to be giving blood?
You know, and I think it's a great reminder to all of us that our country should never be short of blood. We have about 50,000 units of blood right now ready to respond in New York City. But people throughout the country can give blood by calling 1-800-GIVE-LIFE.
Okay, just do that very slowly. 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. L-I-F-E.
Right.
You might try to figure that out numerically for some people who want to figure it out numerically, but it was a little difficult today to figure out whether there was an immediate blood shortage here, even though we know there's blood shortage in the nation as a whole.
Well, as you indicated, you know, as they're pulling people from the rubble over the next couple days, which will continue, that's when the blood will be needed. And again, it's a reminder to all of us that we always need to be ready.
What else does the National Response Team from the Red Cross do? When you say you come in to assist people, what is that?
Today we had disaster vehicles in the neighborhood responding. For example, a gentleman came up to me, had been evacuated from his house and needed his heart medication. So we would make sure we connect him up with hospitals and facility to get him that medication. People will be calling their local Red Cross throughout the United States, trying to find loved ones that were in that building on those airlines. And our local Red Cross here in Greater New York will begin to identify who goes to 13 shelters tonight that the Red Cross is running in Lower Manhattan.
As you were wandered around Lower Manhattan today, how much pressure are the hospitals really under? Hard to get a grasp of that, too.
Again, I believe that, you know, there's the number of people that have actually been pulled, the survivors, are not as many as we'd hope, and so the hospitals...
Not as many yet as we
Correct.
hoped, right?
So the hospitals are not as full as one might think. The number of casualties that have been, you know, taken to hospitals is less than thought at this point, but that's, as you said, the next couple of days we'll see more.
And we don't compare this. I mean, this is comparable to an earthquake in some ways, and we had these two huge buildings that collapsed. This is an act of terrorism, as you well know. But how similar is it in terms of your hopefulness, having seen what you've seen today, that a rescue operation will at least have some measure of success?
Absolutely. I mean, I think all of us have hope that as many people as we could possibly get from the rubble will be saved. I mean, I've seen in earthquakes people buried a number of days that have come out alive, as you have as well, and that's the hope for all of us. And Red Cross and emergency workers tonight, we're feeding 10,000 folks in Lower Manhattan, disaster workers, and that's their primary job, is to try to help find people over the coming days. So Red Cross will be there with them.
Among the horrifying spectacles today, of course, for all of us, is as people fled in panic from the scene of these disasters, the police and the firemen were on their way in to try to help people going under the way, and those two departments in New York City have suffered grievously.
Absolutely. The loss in the fire and police is significant. It is always the case, I think, when there's a disaster. There's so many people running away, and yet there are people like Red Cross volunteers and fire and police.
What's the mood on the
street that are moving in? Again, it's a sense of quietness. I think people are stunned. I don't think anyone ever could believe that that could happen right here in New York City, and I think people are just stunned. But also New Yorkers have been incredible. As I was driving up here tonight, people knocking on my window of the Red Cross vehicle saying, I want to be a volunteer, I want to give blood, I want to help. Students from NYU coming up to me begging where they could go and help tonight. So people are responding. People wrapping police fire bands around, you know, there's bands, there's yellow bands around their arms, helping direct traffic. Just like I saw in Turkey and Izmit. I mean, people respond when people need help.
Well, I very much appreciate you coming and taking the time to talk to us. Frank Donahue from the National Disaster Response Team of the Red Cross, and he has said something important. There it is on your screen here, that no matter where you are in the country is in need of blood, and in these immediate emergencies outside Washington and in New York, there will be an intense need for blood in the next couple of days. So you can call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE, excuse me, which translates numerically into 1-800-448-3543. Thanks, Mr. Donahue, very much for coming in. Frank Donahue came up from Philadelphia and just telling us what we've heard so many times today, that the mood on the street is utterly mixed, and yet everywhere you go there are people who wish to volunteer. It's interesting, he said, characteristic of the same thing he found at Izmit in Turkey, where they had those terrible earthquakes within a year ago. And it happens everywhere. The earthquake in Mexico City, I remember, same kind of thing. People just spring into action and do what it is that they can do. There are people in the country who may have tried to take advantage of it. I have a note here somewhere about the state of gasoline supplies in the country. A lot of people in the country anxious that somehow these attacks on the states would lead to a shortage of gas supplies, have rushed to fill up. Don't mean to suggest hoard, but have certainly rushed to fill up, and there were certain people in some parts of the country who may or may not have taken advantage of this. But certainly Exxon Mobil and BP are two of the large companies which have done what they could tonight in various regions of the country to let people know that there was going to be no shortage of gasoline, no interruption of the oil supply as a result of the attacks today, and urged everybody to keep the price just where it was and not take advantage of your fellow citizens. Now, the economic ramifications of this are immediate and they are international. And Betsy Stark is still with us after these many hours to give us a summary of the impact that this has had in terms of the globalization in which we now live.
Peter, you're right that this is kind of a cautionary tale on the kind of havoc that can be wreaked on the economy. Not surprisingly, oil prices in the futures market did shoot up today on fears that there could be supply disruptions if there's an escalation of tensions, and particularly if those tensions involve the Middle East, which is a source of so much oil production. And evidence tonight that some gas stations are taking advantage of that fear. In Oklahoma, Mississippi, Missouri, and Michigan, a doubling and tripling of gasoline prices to as much as $5 a gallon. And as you say, consumers fearful that there will be shortages waiting online to fill up. But important to tell you, the American Petroleum Institute says there are no shortages of supply. Refinery production is going strong. And the only place we may expect some supply disruptions are New York City, as you can understand.
Now, on the international financial markets day, the New York Exchange was closed, the American Stock Exchange was closed, and is going to stay closed tomorrow. Can you get some sense of the international ramifications as how people interpret the United States and the American economy in the wake of this?
Well, Peter, as you know, psychology is such a strong element in the way the world looks at the health of markets. And what we had today was a blow not only physically to the heart of the financial district, but also in striking the Twin Towers, the center of finance and commerce in New York City and around the world, a blow to investor confidence in the United States as in its ability to kind of continue to be the economic engine that holds the economy together at a time when not only is the U.S. economy on the verge of recession, but economies around the world are. So there's great anxiety in world markets. Our markets, as you say, will be closed tomorrow, and we won't have an announcement until tomorrow on when they will open up. But
the Japanese markets, I mean, it's now 9 o'clock in the West, a little after midnight in the East, so the Japanese, the market is open today. There's a market open somewhere, everywhere in the world. What do you see?
Well, what you see is you see investors around the world, their confidence shaken. The Japanese market opened, as you say, a couple hours ago and has gone down about 5–6%. So, you know, that's a bad day, but it's, you know, it's not a crash. I mean, you know, the global financial system has not fallen apart, Peter, but it has been shaken.
Why are the American and New York Stock Exchanges going to stay closed tomorrow? It's interesting how the political establishment, the Congress, has made a very public point of being open and doing business tomorrow. Why not the exchanges here?
Well, some of it has to do with the fact that the New York Stock Exchange is located just a few blocks from where the World Trade Center Twin Towers once stood. So it's going to be difficult in terms of transportation, in terms of safety, in terms of not interfering with the rescue operations and the cleanup of that area to actually get employees down into the stock exchange. And the major financial firms, which operated out of the Twin Towers, out of the World Financial Center across the street from the Twin Towers, have also got some cleaning up to do and some damage assessment to do before they can be back to full operations.
Betsy, just join me in taking a look at your television monitor there. And here is a list of some of the companies which did business in the World Trade Center. Look at Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley had 50 floors in Tower Number 1, 12.5% of the tower owned by Morgan Stanley. Now, we do not know that all of that was devoted to Morgan Stanley investment business. They may have sublet it in some cases to other, because Deutsche Bank, Bank of America, Oppenheimer funds, all who are deeply involved in the international financial community, had offices in there. And 9% of the tower, in Tower 1, of course, is the Port Authority, responsible for the bridges and the tunnels around New York. And they are all those offices and many of their employees today lost. Anything else to add, Betsy, before we give you a break?
Well, you know, I would point out, you know, there's been some talk today that that this could be the straw that breaks the camel's back, that in the aftermath of this attack, with markets closed, planes not flying, businesses closed, consumers fearful, maybe glued to their sets, that, you know, we could see a drag on the economy that pushes us into recession. But, you know, we may also see surprising resilience in the market. So I think we don't want to be premature in saying that that only bad things will come out of this in terms of the U.S. economy.
Okay, I much appreciate it, Betsy, because I think one of the things we've experienced today that is much bad as there is today, there is a sense of spirit in the country. You see it reflected to some extent in the various newspaper editorials which are beginning to reach us around the country. And while a great many of them from the East Coast to the West Coast, in the South, in the Midwest, in the Mountain States, are pretty unanimous in saying, as the Arizona Republic did, for example, make no mistake, this is war, and they're almost universal in believing that the United States should attack vigorously anyone whom we can hold, the country can hold responsible for people this. And while some, like the Miami Herald and others, do make it clear that what we've imposed are special weaknesses in the United States, they all reaffirm, as we've seen for many days, the strength of the nation as a whole and the resilient, tried and tested as much as the nation has been today. For the second time today, we have a chance to talk to the former CIA Director, James Woolsey. Mr. Woolsey's in the Washington Bureau now. I think you were at home when I first talked to you this morning, sir. Right. Nice to see you again. Just since we have talked to you today, I assume you've spent a lot of time on the telephone. So what have you learned, and what conclusions, if any, are you coming to this evening?
Well, we touched on this earlier, Peter, but I think that there has already been some rethinking in the United States about the World Trade Center attack in 1993 and the possibility that there may have been Iraqi government involvement in that. There's been an interesting book written by Laurie Milroy on this subject. There's a number of government officials who are interested in it. The Clinton administration seemed to think that the World Trade Center and all of the other terrorist operations were either loose associations of people who came together sort of spontaneously, maybe encouraged by a sermon in a mosque or something, to conduct a terrorist operation, or in the later years of the Clinton administration, it was Osama bin Laden. Very little attention was paid to the possibility that state sponsorship of terror might be alive and well, especially state sponsorship by Iraq. A lot of the rethinking of the World Trade Center bombing of '93 has to do with the identity of Ramzi Yousef, who is in prison out in Colorado. Yousef was possibly, not proven, but possibly involved with Iraqi intelligence. If that rethinking of '93 is accurate, then one very interesting thing about what happened today is that this operation is sort of a combination of Ramzi Yousef's two prior terrorist operations. One against the World Trade Center in '93 with the truck bomb. The other, the attempt to blow up a number of American airliners in the Pacific.
You're talking in terms of modus operandi.
Yes. Now, Ramzi Yousef is not sitting out there in solitary confinement in Colorado masterminding all this. If there's an M.O., and this is only suggestive, it's not probative, it does suggest that some of the same type of thinking may have been behind what was going on in '93, '94, '95, and what went on yesterday.
Are you suggesting, Mr. Woolsey, that what we've seen today in terms of these attacks in New York and outside Washington today, an operation that may have been in somebody's mind for a considerable lengthy period, quite a lengthy period of time?
It's possible. It's quite possible that Osama bin Laden was involved in this, and indeed his group did it. But it is also possible that there was someone behind them. And one candidate is the Iraqi government. Outside chance that it was another terrorist group and the Iranian government was involved, I think that's much less likely.
And there's also the possibility at the moment, and forgive me, I mean this in the best, most respectful sense, that you and a whole lot of the rest of us don't really know a darn thing at the moment.
I confess, I have no inside information on this whatsoever. I've been a private citizen for 6.5 years. This is all just reading the press and surmise.
One of the things that caught our attention very much today, in fact, I had an inadvertent set to with Senator Hatch of Utah, who's on the Judiciary Committee, and Barbara Walters talked to Senator John Edwards of North Carolina today. They both gave, can I see Mr. Woolsey, please? Thank you. They both gave the strong impression today that they had talked to officials in the CIA today who said, in the words of Mr. Edwards, Senator Edwards, there'd been real progress made in the very first hours after this thing had occurred, and I express disbelief. What do you...
Well, it's possible that they picked up some intelligence either just before or just after the events that led them to suspect someone or some group, quite possibly Osama bin Laden. But that doesn't necessarily mean he was in it alone.
How good do you think Osama bin Laden is, and how much tendency has there been in the United States government to zero in, to focus in on him, as somebody observed to me earlier today, because we need the face of an enemy?
Well, he's worth several $100 million, and that goes a long way in countries where he's been based in the past, such as Sudan, and has been recently, such as Afghanistan. He has a number of followers. He is dedicated, and he has people who work for him who hate the United States deeply. So there is at least I think, a reasonable chance that on certainly the East African bombings and perhaps some of these other terrorist operations, he has been directly and immediately involved, including the Cole. But it doesn't mean that there's no one behind him working with him or guiding him or suggesting approaches or helping with false identities and travel documents and all the rest. And the prime candidate there would have to be, not proven, but would have to be Iraq, I believe.
Do you sense, or do you have any knowledge that bin Laden has been anywhere else but Afghanistan? It is conventionally believed that he is protected by the Taliban government, which has led people like the former Assistant Secretary of State Larry Eagleburger to suggest tonight that the Taliban should be attacked directly by the United States if they're found to be complicit in this.
The Taliban has certainly been harboring him, but they may have been his hotel, not, to mix a metaphor, not the Wizard of Oz behind the scene pulling the levers. That role would far more be likely to be in the hands of Iraq than this very chaotic conservative government of Afghanistan.
I don't expect a former director of the CIA to be particularly critical of the CIA today. But I think we believe that nobody in the United States government or its intelligence agencies knew this was going to happen today or had any kind of an inkling that we have heard a whisper about today. Do you think the CIA and the other intelligence agencies in the country are as good as they need to be?
No, they're not as good as they need to be. I think they're the best in the world, but they're not as good as they need to be, because in this business you have to be perfect. It's like playing goalie on a hockey team with any goal scored against you being absolutely deadly. You have to stop everything. And the CIA and the rest of the intelligence community and the FBI did a good job back around the time of Y2K in stopping several terrorist incidents, and they've stopped a number of others that have not been publicized. But you have to stop them all, and you need enough good intelligence to be able to either stop them or help other people, law enforcement or the military, stop them, and this one was a terrible, terrible tragedy.
Now, Mr. Woolsey, we're grateful for the time that you have given us today and the knowledge that you bring to this subject. Thank you very much. I hope you won't go too far away, or at least we'll know where to find you.
It's good to be with you.
In the hours and the days ahead. I want to now bring in our principal military analyst for many years, Tony Cordesman, who's in our Washington Bureau, and has devoted an enormous amount of time over the years to writing, studying, and publishing about military and terrorism in the Middle East, from Afghanistan all down through the Persian Gulf. Tony, you there?
Yes, I am, Peter.
What are your observations on these discussions we have been having about terrorism and who might be responsible today?
I think the problem is we all know who the usual suspect is. That's Osama bin Laden. We also know that there are 3 nations that have strong hostile elements: Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And all of these countries could have played some role. What we don't have is any evidence as yet that we know exactly the role that either Osama bin Laden personally played or that any government played, whether it is the Afghan government or the other 3 governments I've mentioned. More than that, people have talked, I think, rather carelessly about attacking leaders. But how do you find a leader? How do we find Osama bin Laden? If we attack Afghanistan, do we attack a city, a power plant? Because we can't find the theocrats that rule it. They don't live in government buildings, and blowing them up doesn't really get to the leadership. So I think that we've heard a natural reaction, almost overreaction. But what we haven't heard is how we are going to this time attack the leaders responsible when we didn't do this in the case of Beirut or Al-Kober, or for that matter, Pan Am 103.
But Tony, it's clear, I think, to everybody that the bar has been raised higher than it's ever before. This is attack on the U.S. mainland. This has been described in virtually every editorial in the country today. We heard from every politician this is an act of war. And so why should the bar not be raised higher? Why should the country not be thinking of attacking the leaders if they're in any way complicit in these attacks today?
Well, I think we should consider attacking the leaders. That's not the issue. We have to make sure that they are A, guilty, and B, we can actually target them, and we have the means to kill them. And in doing so, we don't simply attack civilians or people who are not guilty. And that is